as I was, though. I missed it.
Is everyone good? All right, time starts now. Mariloma proudly affirms, resolved, the United States federal government should impose price controls on the pharmaceutical industry. Our sole argument is breaking the death grip. The OMI explains that the domination of monopolies in the pharmaceutical industry has led to non-competitive markets hurting research and development while raising prices for consumer drugs. Empirically, after the US started to move away from the policies that had fostered an open market for pharmaceuticals, within 10 years, 60 pharmaceutical companies merged into just 10. This created a monopoly in the industry with very little competition, allowing companies to raise the cost of drugs to unprecedented levels. Code 18 of the UPI reports that drug prices have been rising 12% every year over the last 5 years. This trend will continue as Eamon of CNBC projects that drug prices will double within the next decade. Luckily, affirming solves this crisis. Implementing price controls would set a price cap where drugs can't be charged beyond a certain price. This is crucial because Carol 17 of VCU elaborates that the market in its current state will never be able to provide a long-term solution to high prices. He says that due to the lack of awareness of drug prices by insurers and prescribers, the market can't set correct prices and levels of use without government intervention through price controls. This is why Lockwood 15 of USD empirically finds that price controls would on net decrease costs 20%. There are 3 impacts, and the first is medical adherence. Preet in 2017 reports that 55% of Americans require prescriptions, a number he says is only growing. However, high prices decreases medication usage. Lakefield in 2017 finds that 45 million Americans don't fill their prescriptions because they cost too much, a rate 9 times higher than other developed countries. Thompson 08 of the London School of Economics confirms that every 10% increase in drug prices decreases medication usage 8%. Delaying treatment is dire, as Broby 17 of the University of West Madison states that every year people not taking their prescriptions because of cost causes 125,000 deaths, at least 10% of hospitalizations, and cost the healthcare system $289 billion annually. Second is insurance premiums. Heath in 2018 finds that high drug prices account for almost a quarter of all insurance premiums. This is because Chan furthers that when drug prices are high, healthcare companies pay more and thus make less money. He says that premiums are then increased because when there's less money going to insurance companies, they have to boost their premiums to compensate for the lost profit. We see this right now as the HHS reports in 2017 that since just 2013, the average health insurance premium has increased by 105%. Problematically, Mangan 18 of NBC finds that price increases for premiums lead people to opt out of coverage. The Washington Post says this creates a vicious cycle where the exit of inexpensive patients from insurance pools drives up premiums even more for patients who remain in the healthcare pool. This is why Abraham of the 17 of NBER quantifies that a 1% increase in price decreases the number of people insured by 1.7%, leading the CBO to contextualize that if we continue at the current rate, 6 million additional people will be uninsured by 2028. This is bad because Chalabi of the Paris Institute finds that 45,000 Americans die every year from the lack of insurance because they don't have a safety net for high prices. Third is the public system. Barlas 18 reports that through the 340B program, Medicare helps hospitals that serve uninsured and low-income communities gain access to medication by reimbursing them for the sales price of the drug, plus 6%. This program covers about 14,000 providers and 45% of all hospitals. But as drug prices rise, Medicare compensates by decreasing expenditures to balance their fixed budget. This is done by lowering reimbursement rates, which according to Robin 18 of GEMS finds that Medicare has done twice in recent years to cut costs. Ellison 18 of the BHR corroborates this year that Medicare decreased reimbursement rates to hospitals in the 340B program by 22% to offset the increased drug costs. These cuts are deadly, as Blue 14 of USD finds empirically that hospitals respond by cutting operating costs per bed and by shrinking their staff, damaging patient outcome. Thank you.
Alright, everybody ready?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna start having my first word. Alright.
We negate the resolution. The United States federal government should impose price controls on the pharmaceutical industry. For clarification, we have a few definitions to provide for you. First, price controls are the setting of ceiling prices on basic goods and services by a government as to fight inflation, according to Collins Dictionary, and the pharmaceutical industry develops, manufactures, and sells drugs, according to Kitsis 11. The framework for today's debate is net benefits. To determine what should be implemented, we must determine which side has more overall benefits to the most amount of people. Our first contention is undermining innovation. With the implementation of price controls on pharmaceutical companies, the incentive and funding for research is significantly decreased in effect. The benefits that innovation and research contribute to the pharmaceutical industry are far too significant for the funding to be increased or diminished in the effect of price controls. According to Rice 18, it costs on average $2.6 billion to develop a new drug. That means a company will only bring a new drug to the market if they feel confident that once it hits the shelves, the drug will make its profit back and from what they spent in the beginning. Take away their ability to recoup their investment, and companies will stop spending the billions of dollars on drugs to make them and bring them to the market. This essentially shows that there is already great risk involved in developing and releasing a new drug. Any kind of price control will increase that risk because price controls can limit the ability of researchers to effectively develop new life-saving drugs. When researchers lose a large portion of the money that they receive from private corporations, they have less funding to start research as well as less incentive to develop new drugs for the public. Francis 18 states that their basic finding is that by cutting prices by 40 to 50%, in the United States, it will lead to between a 30 and 60% fewer R&D projects being undertaken in the early stages of developing a new drug. In applying price controls on pharmaceutical companies, these companies are unable to gain enough funding to create new medicine to compound the growing influx of disease. By negating to the resolution, pharmaceutical companies maintain the ability to effectively research and develop drugs necessary for the health of consumers. With the implementation of price controls on pharmaceutical companies, we deprive the ability of these companies to save lives of those who would benefit from medical innovation. We could better protect the safety and prosperity of consumers by negating to the resolution. Our second contention is market shortage. As the government places price controls on pharmaceutical companies to limit the amount of money that the companies are able to make, less producers are willing to sell at the decreased price. With such significant decrease in profit for producers, they have less incentive to produce more pharmaceuticals for public use. Sullivan 18 states that government's tight price controls induce drug makers to exit various markets, or at least to reallocate their manufacturing capacity toward more profitable patented pharmaceuticals. Low prices also tend to eliminate the rationale for investments in better manufacturing technologies and processes, and limit the manufacturer's margin to 6% in many cases. As companies begin to profit less, there is a visible decrease in the manufacturing of drugs open to the public. As demand increases for drugs at a lower price, supply decreases due to the decrease in profit of these companies. Many prominent manufacturers will drop out of the market or divert their efforts somewhere else in order to make the most out of their economic profit. Stein 11 says that Dr. Topol's federal regulators are struggling to cope with the unprecedented surge in drug shortages in the United States that is endangering cancer patients, heart attack victims, and accident survivors, and a host of other ill people. As the government begins to implement stricter price controls in the pharmaceutical industry, less drugs are being produced in effect. Consumers are robbed of their ability to purchase drugs that they may not be able to afford due to the price controls placed on companies, offering less incentive for companies to produce lower prices. For all these reasons, we urge a strong vote for the negation.
Ready?
Yeah.
All right. Since you just talked first, round first one.
Of course.
All right. So your argument about innovation. Basically, the idea of this is you're justifying that high drug prices is meant for companies to make innovative drugs, right?
Yes.
So how much does an average innovation cost average consumer?
And how do you mean that?
Like what I'm saying, right, is that what I'm trying to allude to is that affordability always prerequisites innovation. It doesn't matter what innovation you come up with if that innovation is not affordable for the vast majority of consumers.
But we're going to be cutting off innovation if we can't make these.
No, that's fine. We'll dispute that. I'm just asking you, can the consumer afford the average innovation, the innovation that you talk about?
A percentage? No.
And that percentage is 45 million people, is what Litchfield tells you in our case.
Do you know what percentage of the actual population that is?
I mean, we can do the math, but like 45 million people is what our Litchfield evidence says. People
Okay,
that are
of course.
drugs.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so you talk about your insurance contention. I ask you, how do you know that these insurance companies aren't just going to absorb the extra profit they're making from price controls?
I mean, I'm not sure what that means. Like, our argument is...
So let me explain it further. So basically, if we implement price controls, now the insurance companies are paying less to get a drug to the consumer who has purchased their insurance.
That's the point.
So basically, if we take down what the insurance companies are actually spending on these drugs, how do we know the insurance companies aren't just going to keep that extra money?
I'm not sure if you understand what our insurance premiums argument is saying. Our argument is saying is that right now, because drug prices are high, companies have to boost their insurance premiums because that's the only way that they can make profit, because they're paying more to get the drug. Our argument fundamentally is that if you reduce the price of drugs, then there's no incentive. These
insurance companies are out there to get the most profit possible. They're out there to actually to get the most from people, to benefit their company. So basically, if they all of a sudden, if they're getting more from their,
I get that, right? Like, but I get what you're saying, but that's not really what we're arguing, right? Our argument is very simple. It's that because drug prices are really high, insurance companies have no choice but to increase their premiums because that's the only way that they can make a profit. If you shift the price,
do you have evidence saying that that's the only way they can make their profit? Because it seems pretty illogical.
That's just logical. Like, you don't need evidence for that, but sure, yeah, I can show you.
Insurance companies get money from so many other things. It's not just the drugs. It's illogical to say that basically.
Okay, yeah, we'll cover that. That's fine. Can I have a question?
Yes.
So let's talk about this market shortage argument. So you say that there's a shortage in like cancer drugs right now, right?
Yes, in our
So what happens when there's a shortage? We see prices skyrocket because there's less supply, so prices skyrocket.
Exactly, that's why we're on the
So you concede yourself that there is shortages in your world, in the status quo. Wouldn't a world where there is price controls to cap how much these prices can be spiked up?
No, because now when you're decreasing the profit that companies get from selling these drugs, now they don't have enough money to keep making these drugs.
Right,
we're going to be cutting off.
That's not responsive to what I asked, but that's fine. All right, that's your question. She's not taking time, so.
I'm sorry, Brian.
No, no.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, I understand sound.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. I need some water.
It's fine. You're-
Right, sure. I
Yeah.
haven't touched you.
It's okay. Thank you.
Should I be ready? Everyone's ready? Time starts now. Let's first take a look at this idea of undermining innovation. First, after studying investment over a 20-year time period, Fleming and Forbes finds that research and development returns in drug development currently stands at 3.2% and will reach 0 in 2020. The warrant is that each new drug improves the current standard of care, which then raises the bar for the next drug, making it more expensive and difficult to achieve any actual improvement. Thus, companies spend more to get diminishing benefits, which leads to less demand, and research and development will no longer be profitable. What does this do? A, it non-uniques their entire case, meaning regardless of price controls or implementing them, this will happen. And B, it actually allows us to go for our side because it's a try or die impact. We've been trying what they have been doing for so long, and research and development will still get worse. But you would go with our side because it has some kind of solution. But now let's take a look at this idea of funding. First, realize that affirming will offset the harms because when price controls are implemented, price decreases, which then increases demand, which is why Sager of Boston University finds that affirming will boost the sales volume enough to offset the lost funding from lower prices, meaning that this funding will actually not be lost. Rather, we would have more volume, which means more people are going to buy, and it stays essentially the same. Ginsburg of USC also says that in 2018, we've reached the point where the yield from additional resources going into R&D is leading to less breakthroughs. Prefer this link because we increase productivity by lowering these prices. Vivian of the US News writes that companies devote a net of only 1.3% of funds to actually research, and that drug innovation only costs a tenth of what they actually say it does. So even if you got their impact that we're not going to have money to fund this, the impact is still a lot smaller than what they make it out to be. But if anything, research and development is better on our side. Hopkins at the FGC reminds us that none of their funding law studies take into account of government subsidies. But the IMF reports that price controls would automatically be accompanied by a government subsidy revenue. This is critical because insofar as companies spend a lot of profit on things like advertising, subsidies go for 100% core research. This is why Shang 18 of the NDPI finds that every 1% increase in subsidies increases private R&D investment 58%. Now that's 58% that you're not going to get access to on their side. That's more than the status quo. So R&D is inherently better on our side. Then we should delink the entire argument because Han 16 of Harvard tells us pharmaceutical companies, when they face shrinking revenues, they seek to minimize risk and make less upfront investments. So they make more partnerships with academic institutions for research, which is cheaper because they don't have to do the research themselves and they can receive both academic and government grants. Historically, lower revenues have been met with more academic research partnerships. This is a good thing because academic research is actually the most altruistic, finding cures for cancer, not Viagra 2.0, and these companies help support academic institutions when you apply price controls. And finally, looking at this idea of market shortage. Recognize that in a world with or without price controls, there are current reforms that can adequately address drug shortages. Ferrari of Harvard writes that the FDA can still solve them in two major ways. The first is that they ramp up production of hard-to-get drugs by expediting the approval of materials that have already gone through licensing procedures. And second, they look for international sources for specific drugs, then review the safety. This is why Mills of the AMA writes shortages are seen as an urgent public health crisis, and the Department of Health would immediately intervene to solve. But finally, recognize that they even non-unique their own case. They bring up this cancer medication, which is literally happening right now in a free market. We would argue that this is exactly what's going to be changing. And finally, look at this concept of historical precedent. Europe has 10 times less the drug shortages than the United States, despite having rigorous price regulation and price controls in most places. That means with price controls, we're better off than what the US is at right now. Europe is clearly better off, so this will happen as well.
Yeah, we're gonna take some right now. Yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you. My first word. Okay, in this speech, I will be refuting my opponent's points, and if time permits, I will be going over and strengthening my case. Okay, first I would like to go over the first contention, saying that they would, without implementing price controls, we will be dominating monopolies and not have competitive industry. I would like to point this to saying that the AF must prove that placing price caps will have a greater impact than the inherent price drops of competition that are already occurring in the status quo. With the competition occurring, according to Rise 18, if on the other hand you allow companies to innovate freely, competition will eventually drive down prices across the board. The FDA approved a handful of alternative hepatitis C medicines, the cheapest of what cost $26,400. And up against competition, the companies had no choice but to lower their prices in effect. This basically states that if we were to not have a price control placed on these companies, they would be allowed to have competition freely rather than have a stricter policy placed on them by the price controls, in which the price controls are implemented. With this innovation, they could be better allowed to allocate this money that they would be creating more R&D revenue and more profit for themselves and the company, as well as go towards research and development for new drugs that could help the citizens that are buying and the consumers that are buying it. I would also like to go over their contention about insurance premiums. They failed to provide evidence that insurance premiums are the only way that, and increasing the price for insurance companies are the only way to increase the profit for these insurance companies, and thus bringing that back. So I would like you to completely disregard that piece, or that contention. And then also I would like to be going over the contention on when they tried to refute our contention on R&D decreasing. When R&D reduction budget occurs due to profit decrease that is initiated when price controls are implemented on these pharmaceutical companies. As Easton 18 states, if U.S. drug prices come under bureaucratic control, it will be a different story. Little pharmaceutical innovation occurs in price-controlled jurisdictions. Top pharmaceutical companies would have to reduce their R&D budgets by 80%, almost $50 billion in total. This completely disregards what the refutation to my case saying that R&D. They say that they are making a policy and a way to solve this R&D budget mishap, but that would be more of a policy debate rather than a public forum to have to implement and actually set up a policy in which we would be implementing this. What I'm saying is that R&D is in current development is already decreasing, and with the price cap on these pharmaceutical industries, we would be facing an 80% decrease in the budget, which is almost $50 billion in total. I would also like to say that according to that when having these implementations in place, the R&D budget will decrease, and we will no longer be able to institute R&D that will better help the society and better help the consumers by increasing and making more drugs that are available and combat the growing influx of diseases that is currently in our status quo currently. So, I would also like to say it's a simple economic concept that if more demand increases because of the drug price control implementation, then with the profit or with the production staying at the same price and the profit decreasing, they're going to have a shortage already being placed on the companies because they won't be able to keep up with the amount of demand that the people have when they're buying more drugs and want to buy more drugs if they have less stock and less surplus being paid. And for these reasons, thank you.
All right. Judge, ready?
Yeah, sorry.
All right. Yeah. All right. So you talked about like free competition, right? Why haven't we seen like all the positive impacts we're talking about happening when we've seen drug prices increase 12% every year for the last 5 years? So like you talked about like free competition and how that's like really, really good, right?
Yes.
And how that would encourage all these positive things. My question is, if that's incentivizing companies to lower prices, then how come we've seen drug prices increase 12% every single year for the last 5 years?
Well, the competition that I was regarding to was according to Gilead, the company that I was describing, right? Which basically said that since the cheapest drug that they had was over $26,000, right? At that price, with competition and the influx of companies coming in, they were able to lower that price because of
And
that.
like logically that like could make sense, that makes sense, right? But then why isn't it, by the facts, why isn't that working, right? Because that's just one company. But we show you holistically, drug prices are on the increase. Like they're on the inclines. My confusion is that like what you're talking about seems to just be speculation, not actually working, at least on a holistic level. But if you want to question.
So I would like to see, do you have evidence saying that the only way that insurance companies are able to increase their profit is by premiums,
Right.
and they have no
So-
other way of doing
Right. So Heath in 2018 literally tells you that high drug prices account for almost a quarter of all insurance premiums, right? And then Chan goes on to say that when drug prices are high, healthcare companies pay more and thus make less money, and premiums are then increased. Like this has happened before. It's not like it's not like we're speculating this. We even tell you that because
So
drug
wasn't I
prices.
not speculating either with the competition thing? That was the actual company.
Yeah, but I'm saying you're not giving us a holistic thing, whereas we could literally tell you that HHS said that since 2013, the average health insurance premium has increased by 105%, and it completely corroborates with the idea
But
that
how do you
drug
know
prices
that's
are on
the only
So
way
tell
that?
me why.
But how do you know that's the only way that they can talk about?
No, there's two pieces of evidence we clearly bring up, right? We tell you drug prices for the last 5 years, so let's say 2013, have increased 12% every single year. And in accordance with that, we tell you that HHS tells you from 2013, insurance premiums have increased 105%. There's a clear link there, but if you can provide me a different link, then I'll buy into it.
I'm not saying that link isn't there. I'm just saying, how do you prove that that's the only link?
It doesn't, even if we concede that that's not the only link, right? Recognize the fact that those impacts are so gigantic, and you would have to engage with the actual warrant of that idea. Can I have a question? Yes. So let's talk about some historical precedent, right? You guys talk about shortages, right? And I tell you that in Europe, there's 10 times less shortages for drugs right now, and they're in a price-controlled market, and we're in a free market. So where's the logic there? We have historical precedent, right? I'm just kind of confused on this drug shortages idea. If in Europe there's less.
If in Europe there's less what?
Drug shortages.
Okay, well, if in Europe there's less drug shortages, that could be due to different economic cusps that Europe is facing versus the United States.
Okay, sure.
We'll take running breath. That was 1 minute and 6 seconds. Are the opponents good? Alright. Time starts now. At the end of the day, the weighing becomes whether affordability or innovation is a more bigger argument in this debate. But the problem is, never once do they tell you how many people are being saved by innovation. All they tell you is that there's these R&D budgets that go down. But B, we tell you that the vast majority of innovations are very expensive in the status quo, which means our case about making these drugs affordable fundamentally prerequisites the entirety of their case. Because it does not matter what innovation happens if they are not affordable for the vast majority of Americans. But at that point, they tell you that prices are going to decrease either way because of innovation. But the Cone 18 evidence that they never respond to looks at the entire industry and tells you that we have seen 12% increase in drug prices every year. Clearly, their side is not solving back for these issues. But then on our impact on medication adherence, they never talk about it. Litchfield tells you that 45 million people are not buying drugs because it costs too much. Brody tells you that this is killing 125,000 people annually. They don't give you any numbers as to how many people are affected on their side, but we are giving you very concrete data. Then on our second impact about insurance premiums, they only tell you that companies are profit driven, but we are giving you historical precedent that we are seeing an increase in the premiums by 105%. This leads people to not have insurance and to opt out, and now they have no safety net. And then on the public system, they never talk about it. That damages patient and patient outcomes. So overall, a lot of our case is just left untouched. But then on their contention, what about innovation? It basically goes under this argument that we would see a decrease in profit and that now companies won't be able to innovate. But the Sager evidence tells you that we see an increase in the quantity demand when prices decrease, which means now more people are buying drugs, which means it offsets the marginal decrease in the price. Then they tell you that, then we tell you that only 1.3% actually goes towards innovation. They tell you that there's going to be an 80% decrease, but an 80% decrease in 1.3% is really not that much. On their argument on drug shortages, remember, Europe has strict price controls, and they have 10 times less shortages than the United States right now. This directly means that their correlation that they're providing isn't actually happening in the status quo, and it's all just speculative. And it's for these reasons that I don't see anything other than an affirmative ballot. Thank you.
Alright, is everybody ready? Okay, I'm gonna start time my first word. In this speech, I'm going to be going over 4 main voter issues, and then I'm going to be going on to why we are winning this debate. First, I'm moving on to their first contention, which is talking about monopolies. So basically, we, right now, in the status quo, have a free market, and it's being successful. And we need this free market to allow companies to recoup the mass amounts. We told you $2.6 billion that they're losing to create new drugs. They need to be able to make that profit back. That's why we're actually getting and we're making this successful right now. It actually creates a successful market, and we have a card from Laport saying that we are the leading market out of all of our nations, and this is why. So this is really important. Moving on now to their second contention about insurance. They say that the drugs which account for a quarter of the premiums, basically they say that by changing that, we're going to have to increase premiums for the consumers. But we also don't know if the companies are just going to absorb the extra profit they're actually going to take, because if they lower the prices of the drugs, the insurance company, there's a very good chance they're actually just going to take that profit for themselves. Why would they give back to the consumers when they could have to benefit their company? Now moving on to our contention about innovation. We told you that innovation is going to be decreasing. Our card from East 18 said that there's going to be less innovation under price controls. Talking about accessibility, which they also brought up. They brought up that 45 million people can't afford their insurance. But is it more important to think about the 45 million people right now, or to think about R&D for the future? The impacts are infinite in R&D. We should be siding with the fact that research and development ensures our safety for the future. These impacts outweigh theirs infinitely, because we should be worrying more about actually getting these drugs that haven't been created yet actually to the public, instead of just worrying about getting a couple of these out now. So basically, I'm also be moving on to our shortages argument. It's common knowledge that demand goes up, supplies can go down because we can't handle it. And really quickly talking about our Europe part, Europe's economy is different from ours, so we really can't account that part. And so for all these reasons, we are just strong vote for the negation.
Are you guys ready? Okay. Can I start with the first question?
Yeah.
So, do you guys have a piece of evidence that says how many companies, how much in a company's budget are they putting towards innovation?
Didn't you already bring it up to like the 1.3%?
Yeah, so 80% decrease in 1.3%. You're telling me that's
I know, but the research and development accounts for so much of the future. It doesn't matter what percent of their profit it is. That ensures what we're actually doing to develop new drugs. That's more important. It doesn't matter what it is their entire profit.
No one here, like the judge and I, aren't going to dispute the fact that innovation is a good thing. Everyone knows that innovation is a good thing. But the problem is, if companies are only spending 1.3% on innovation, and you take 80% away from that, how is that going to kill more than the 45 million people that we tell you are being priced out? Because you're trying to
because if we take away 80% of what we're doing,
1.3%.
Sorry, I mean 80% relating to 80% of their 1.3%. That's taking 80% away of what we're doing to actually combat and making the drugs for the future.
All right, I totally get that. Can you terminalize or contextualize for me how many people that's affecting?
Yeah, how many people
How could we possibly know? It's
Don't
the
tell me
entire
how much.
country.
Okay, fine. Don't tell me about the future. right now, how much does R&D affect the 1.3%?
How many people are being
Like
affected
right
by your
now, you
1.3%?
can tell me that, that's not hard evidence.
Couldn't you argue that it'd be the entire nation because the
No,
entire
because the
nation?
entire nation can't even access
These drugs, that's our point, right? Because our argument, and I
Okay, then we can argue, just for your point, we can argue the part that's actually accessible to it, we can argue that it's all of them.
Well, no,
Which
but our argument is that they aren't accessible, right? Because our Code 18 evidence, which is looking at the industry as a whole, is showing that prices are increasing for 12%.
Do you have
every
evidence that the
year.
people who can't access these drugs is more than the people who can't? Because I think that's very
let's just
likely,
do
and so we should be worrying about the majority of the people who are actually talking about it.
Let's just do some logical understanding.
Okay.
The best innovation, which is going to save millions of lives. Do you think that's going to be very cheap?
No.
Exactly. So if you don't have price controls, then they're not going to be able to access
Price
the
controls
innovation.
take away profit. That's what
price
price
control
control
is
is.
gonna take away the profit from the companies to
Again,
Okay,
1.3%.
let's take a look at
We
the
can move on though. You guys have a question?
Okay, well, going back to your insurance argument here, what is your evidence here that basically it's actually going to make a massive difference? I understand.
Okay, so
I understand where you're going, but I just fail to see that they couldn't. They possibly. It's only a
Yeah,
quarter.
I understand. So your response is why would they absorb the profit, right?
And if the drug prices only account for 1/4 of the
All right,
premium.
right. So we already tell you, right? There's 105% increase in insurance premiums just because drug prices are increasing. That's direct historical precedent. What's happening right now?
Can I have a quick question?
So that clearly shows that's that's what's
Okay,
happening.
so you guys basically only touch our insurance premiums argument. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that we talk about. Do you have any actual?
Okay, well, if you want to, we can go back to monopolies. I would like to know how you can argue this because monopolies are the reason why we're successful. I told you we're the
Yeah,
median
that's-
company.
Yeah,
We're the
yeah,
median market.
That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense, right?
How does
If
that
60
make
pharmaceutical
sense?
right.
Why
If
is drug prices?
if 60 pharmaceutical companies merge into 10, then there's no competition, so companies now have no incentive to decrease prices. The competition drives pricing.
The monopolies.
All right, we're gonna take the last page. Judge Doty, time starts now. There's two major pieces of evidence that they lack to have in this debate. The first is that they still cannot tell you exactly how many people are affected by these innovations. And second, they fail to recognize how costly the best innovation would be. We would argue, Judge, that affordability is a prerequisite to innovation because if people can't afford the innovation, then why make it in the first place? But now let's take a look at the two main voter issues. The first is our point of releasing the death threat. We have three main impacts. First of all, recognize that medical adherence and public system, those two impacts are completely untouched by our opponents throughout this debate, and here's why that matters. We tell you that Litchfield tells us 45 million Americans don't have access. Why is that important? They themselves frame the debate as net benefits. Net benefits wise, we win this debate. They can give you a single piece of holistic evidence. So even if you were to buy all their links recognized on their framework of net benefits, we win. Next, looking at this idea of insurance. They cannot respond to the actual logic or warrant. The only response they give us is, oh, we don't have any evidence. We literally give you direct evidence and examples of when this has happened, when health premiums have gone up, specifically because drug prices are going up. With price controls, this would happen. Third, looking at public system. Once again, completely dropped. Net benefits again. The Medicare would cut the 340B program, which helps so many people, as Wu tells you that this would cut operating costs and hurt patients. But next, looking at this idea of innovation. Once again, they don't refute this historical precedent concept. We talk about medical shortages. We respond to that with Europe. We respond to it so many times. Then they tell us that the status quo is already successful. If that was necessarily true, why would we see drug prices be increasing 12% every single year? Then they talk about innovation. They say we need to recognize that only 1.3% of the actual budget goes towards R&D, which means even if you said an 80% decrease would happen, that money would be so insignificant that you can't see the impact they're talking about, and we would win on net benefits.
We're just gonna use this. We're just gonna
No, it's fine. I'll get it at the next round.
She's a draft.
Yeah, I'll just stand outside and make sure she doesn't come in during her speech. Or like look, make sure she like looks really.
Just like make sure she
Yeah,
doesn't
make
walk
sure
in.
she's not walking in the building.
Ready? Are they ready?
Yeah.
Judge ready? Time starts. Okay, in this final focus, I will be going and weighing our impacts versus my opponent's impacts. So first, I would like to say that we have shown in the status quo that competition has been a direct correlation to innovation, with more competition across the board through Rice 16 showing that Gilead, a company who had a $26,000 price for drugs, has been decreased due to competition, and this has better allowed us to innovate and better allow us to combat the growing influx of diseases that are prevalent in society now. I would like to say that if they keep arguing that prices are continually going up, this could be directly due to the lack of R&D available. If R&D is decreased and because of price controls implemented, that means that less drugs are able to be innovated and able to be present to the public. This means that there's going to be a less broad span of drugs across the board, which basically increase the prices. But if we're allowed to use R&D more and keep up our innovation, then we'd be able to create more drugs available to the public, which means that competition would already continue to grow in the status quo based on the amount of drugs that are being innovated and being implemented into the status quo currently. I would also like to say that they failed to provide a correlation showing that insurance premiums are the only way to increase profit. They failed to provide this information. They even stated it in CrossX that they didn't have evidence saying that that was the only way to increase profits for the insurance companies. So I would also like to state that it is a common economic concept saying that if that if demand increases and supply is decreasing, then we are not going to have enough drugs produced in our status quo to basically combat the growing influx of diseases and growing influx of people who need these drugs. And for these reasons, vote for the drug.
Really good, really good.
Great job, guys.
Thank you.
Good job.
No, you're good.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks for letting me go.
Oh, yeah, no.